Well, fantastic to be here again. Seems to be the place where everything happens, doesn't it, Glastonbury? Right, well, I'm Piers CORBYN, and you know my brother. He used to be my brother, now I'm his brother. And I've said that before. And these are exciting times for us all. This is the most important graph around for a while. This is the upper one, is what the United Nations have been proposing. This is the graph which was believed at first in the 1990s, and Hubert Lamb of the University of Anfield believed this type of stuff, and he wrote to me a long time ago saying he was pissed off how his setup had been taken over, and it was taken over by people who then started propagating this. There was a court case recently because Tim Ball in Canada had said that to Michael Mann, who was the author of this graph, that flat temperatures suddenly rising for the last 1,000 years, he said that Michael Mann should be in the state Penn rather than Penn State University, and therefore it was a libel case. Michael Mann failed to produce evidence to show how he actually got his graph, so the judge ruled against him and awarded all the costs against him and told him he can't even appeal. So this stuff is fraud, but it should have been news, BBC, wall to wall, worldwide, but it wasn't. Now, that very cold bit shows you, this is the symbolic jet stream, rapid moving upper air, high pressure here, low pressure there. But we've got a period now, since the last few years, of a jet stream going north and south a lot. So all the claims they made recently about it being uniformly hot all over the world are actually not proof of anything other than they've been adjusting temperatures all over the world. So they made colder places warmer. They admit to doing this, but they don't advertise that on the mainstream media. Right, the last 600 million years. Very quickly, what we've had is, this is the carbon dioxide levels going around wildly, and this is temperatures. So the most interesting thing about this graph is the temperatures don't actually go very high or very low. Well, they go in steps. And the CO2 goes all over the place. So you can't argue from that CO2 is controlling temperatures. Interesting thing to notice is that we have very low levels of CO2 now, not high, the lowest they've been for 300 million years. Quick flash to the last 10,000 years, right? And before that, you could have had another graph which shows ice age before that. So this is last 10,000 years, before that was an ice age. Now, interesting thing on this graph is we have these peaks, and we're just finishing a peak now. Peaks every 1,000 years, roughly. And the last 9 peaks have all been warmer than the current peak, when according to official data, there's been less CO2. So there's no evidence that CO2 is driving anything. All right? And looking at this graph, the things people argue about mostly is the last 2,000 or 1,000 years. And notice, this is really very cold compared with anything else we've had, which suggests that this is actually the beginning of entry into the next full ice age. Think about that. Here we have Hannibal. Hannibal was crossing the Alps, much warmer then. North Africa had elephants in it, in where the Sahara is, and he was able to use them to go into Spain and catch the Romans from behind and so forth. Very interesting times, but it was definitely a lot warmer then. That's the Roman warm period, you see, and here's the medieval warm period. And here we are now going downwards at the end of that one. What went on at the same time as the standard Tim Ball graph is solar activity was going up when it was warmer and goes down when it was colder. And this little ice age here is known as the Maunder minimum of solar activity. And what we are now is moving into something which might be as cold as this one here called the Dalton minimum, like the Napoleonic Wars, very cold around there, or it might be going to be as cold as the Maunder minimum. We'll discuss that later on, but that is the big question facing us. As far as we're concerned, we're heading towards one or the other or somewhere in between. Right, now if you look at data in detail, you can see that American data, for example, and the world data goes a similar pattern, but with more uncertainties in it. American data goes this sort of waviness in it, which actually is a change of amplitude of fluctuation rather than amounts of. It is warmer then as well, but it's big changes in amplitude of temperature change, right? At the same time, we've had CO2 just going up gently. So the idea that CO2 is controlling these temperatures is just not borne out by anything. It's completely beyond any intelligent argument. Now, all the warmists say is, oh yeah, well, it was less CO2 a long time ago, and it was colder then. Well, if you go back not too far, if you go back to the medieval warm period, it was warmer. So you know they choose a time and make an assertion, but you cannot argue in any way that the CO2 is controlling temperatures on these timescales. Solar activity is going way down. More graphs of solar activity, but this is projections, some of which have certainly come true. But you know, the suggestion here is that this could be as cold as the Maunder minimum. Okay. Oh, and the sunspots, by the way, we're now at a solar minimum, like in 2008. But the number of sunspots at this solar minimum, the number of spotless days, is even lower than 2008. The big news in Greenland is not that it's melting, because there's always icebergs falling off blocks of ice, but the Jacobshavn Glacier is growing and has been for the last 3 years, and that is probably the most important glacier in the world. But that is not BBC News. The North Atlantic is getting generally colder, certainly on this side, but it's not a simple issue what happens in the North Atlantic, but I'll show you this graph because it will get colder during the full little ice age. Yeah, last summer, you remember last summer? It was very hot, which we predicted all that using the solar lunar action technique that we devised. And in particular, end of July, we had this great rush of warm air, which we predicted. Now then the BBC were talking about a worldwide or Northern Hemisphere heat wave, okay? On the 30th of July, it was very hot here, but the average temperature of the Northern Hemisphere land was 0.2 degrees centigrade below normal. They didn't tell you that, they just pretended it was a world heat wave or something. The reason it was like that was because there were wild jet stream air currents giving cold blasts as well as warm blasts. It was also very cold in Australia, and the news about the Arctic is not what they say. It's been getting more ice there for the last couple of years, and the Antarctic has been increasing in ice for the last 30 years. So the key thing to know from all of this, what's happened in the last few years, is we have a wild jet stream, some hot blasts, some cold blasts, but bigger cold blasts, and the jet stream moved further south. And even during the Maunder minimum, the Great Fire of London was in 1666, which was during the Maunder minimum, right? That was preceded by what was called the Belgian wind, a wind of hot air from Belgium, and you know bad things come from Belgium. But the winters before and after that, and for all around that decade, were very cold, with the Thames freezing over. So another example of wild jet stream. That's what we're heading for, more and more. Right, but we're now going to take apart the man-made climate change story. You've heard that 97% of scientists believe that it's all true. Well, actually, they don't, but anyway, that's irrelevant, because you see, Galileo had that problem. He was told, well, he wasn't even allowed to be a scientist. He was told he was just wrong and shown the instruments of torture. You see, however important that someone who professes expertise is, it doesn't mean they're right. The only thing that counts is evidence. The actual survey itself didn't say 97%, it said that 0.3% of those scientists that had written those papers actually concluded that man's activity had been the main cause of warming in the last decade or so concerned, since 1950. Only 0.3%. The others had just put climate change in the headline in order to get grants. Understandable, but not science. They talk about this because they don't want to talk about evidence. Science is not an opinion poll. Anyone who says consensus is science is talking nonsense. Consensus is the end of science. Consensus has never developed science. This Big Ben Tower, 316 feet high. If the atmosphere was Big Ben Tower, symbolically, carbon dioxide would be a piece on the top of the Big Ben Tower, 1.5 inches. And man's contribution to that carbon dioxide would be equivalent to a bird dropping on the top. So, the politicians in there want us to believe that that bird dropping on the top is controlling, and you are making it worse. Now, this is about science, or art. This is a picture by Escher of water flowing uphill. And it goes down, up, down. It is, isn't it? Yeah. Well, you wouldn't know. If you lived in a two-dimensional world, you'd believe it. See, that's a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional reality. And it's a trick. But you see, physics can be a trick, because physics isn't nature, physics is representative of nature. Equations in physics are partial representation of nature. And when you've got complicated things, you can easily choose simplifications and put forward stuff to confuse the public, which is what is done in this case. If we turn on the next one or two, I think some things appear on, so there you are. The arrows of radiation, the global warming story, are not true. Okay, next one. What actually happens is that CO2 levels are an effect, not a cause of temperatures. This is borne out by millions of years of data. The time goes this way here. At the end of the last ice age, temperatures went up, like that, and after temperatures went up, CO2 levels went up. Carbon dioxide levels follow temperatures, not lead them. That is recorded fact. Okay? Now why is this 800 years? That's quite a long time, isn't it? Well, we've got an idea about this, and we'll go on to the next one. The warm currents above the Atlantic come up this, and cold currents come when there's melting ice go underneath. Now, during the medieval warm period, there would have been a warmer surface to the ocean, more CO2 coming out of the ocean, because it doesn't dissolve CO2 so well, like you warm a bottle of pop, CO2 comes off. So CO2 comes out in the medieval warm period. But the melting puts cold water straight into the ocean, which goes underneath the wall, deep in the bottom. And that subsumes this extra CO2. It grabs it, sucks it in. So it's coming out of the surface and being taken back down. There we are. And it goes round and round and comes up again later, 800 years, 600 years, something like that, which is why this water, this extra CO2 is around now. There's nothing we can do about it. Next one. Key things to learn. Man-made climate change fails in 4 points. 1, CO2 levels are an effect, not a cause. 2, man is only 4% of the total CO2, so it's a mad conspiracy theory of nature to make it work. The sea rules not man, and the sun rules the sea, and all the extremes now are the wrong type of extremes for the CO2 story. They come from a wild jet stream, which is not the CO2 story jet stream. This is their picture. They say, okay, that sunlight comes in, warms the warm ground radiates infrared, and that comes up, meets some CO2 and gets sent back. Okay, well. And they have big flashy pictures of that to make children believe it. But is it true? So our idea, this is our thinking, what causes weather extremes in climate change in the long term? The answer is the most important is the jet stream. What changes the jet stream? Answer, the jet stream is changed by changing solar activity, which is largely predicted by us. Now, you see, you ask a meteorologist, they'll say, oh yeah, well the jet stream, well that's controlled by the temperatures. No. The jet stream controls the temperatures, not the temperatures controlling the jet stream. The sun has different modes. The magnetic field of the sun goes one way, one solar cycle, the other way, another solar cycle. That's called the Hale cycle. It's a 22-year magnetic cycle, but there's an 11-year cycle in sunspot moon. There's a 22-year cycle in sunspots of a certain magnetic polarity. And that means what comes out of the sun as an electric current in the surface in this belt around the sun from the equator is either going to be electron-dominated or proton-dominated, depending on the cycle. But that is going to have a different interaction with the Earth. So you can see straight away there's going to be important differences. And the Earth, by the way, is one of these blobs here compared with the Sun. Now, something very exciting here is if you look in detail at this current off Norway that goes into the Arctic, which makes the Arctic melt or not melt, this current often gets more when, well, it gets less, for example. So this is temperatures, or the current, I mean, and this is geomagnetic activity. When there's low geomagnetic activity, the current is low, and when there's been high geomagnetic activity, you get these peaks. Well, that is astounding. I mean, this is observed fact, we don't fully understand it, but it means there's a direct connection between solar magnetic activity and the sea, bypassing the atmosphere. So what happens in the atmosphere is probably driven largely by what happens in the sea through some electrical and magnetic mechanisms. Right, we had some instances where went past these periods where we predicted extrasolar activity called R periods, R5 periods, R4 periods, and those usually correspond to extra weather, thunderstorms and formation of tropical storms. Fine, but sometimes it didn't happen. This period it didn't happen, which is really very strange. We had the weather and we had when we said it would happen, and little things happened on the sun, but nothing, hardly anything in the solar wind. So what was going on? Some magnetic magic connection. Well, what we think is you've got these big electric currents, which in fact they're current pairs called Birkeland currents, connecting the sun to the Earth in polar regions. And there's probably these currents connecting all the stars in the universe or in the galaxy with each other. So this is an electric universe theory of physics, which goes alongside standard physics, but means some things are more comprehensible. Right, what happens then is you have solar activity, the solar wind affects the magnetosphere, affects the jet stream, affects volcanoes, which can also affect circulation of the weather. The jet stream is circulation, weather and climate, and the result, depending on sea temperatures, which are caused by that or those related things, is CO2, which is the gas of life. It's not CO2 causing weather, causing jet stream, causing shock waves in the solar wind and causing solar flares. So when you drive your car fast around Glastonbury again, you're not going to cause a solar flare. How are we going to get to this new little ice age? Well, we're already starting it anyway, but the key thing is generally low magnetic activity on the sun with extra bursts of activity gives you the longer jet streams, and it it means the area of winter snow cover increases. This last late spring, we had the biggest area of snow covering Northern Hemisphere for 50 years. Okay? That cuts out sunlight, and that will therefore reduce temperatures. At the same time, the major earthquakes, the volcanism, some of it gets into the stratosphere, blocks out solar radiation, and that will cause cooling. So we're now in this regime of positive feedback. Okay. This was 2007, which the Met Office said was a barbecue summer. There we have it, barbecue on the boat, yes. 2008, another barbecue summer, and 2009, barbecue summer. So we were right 3 times in a row, and they were wrong. Generally speaking, the official policies for greenness are fake green, as we would say. For example, electric cars are for the very rich, who are also very stupid, because their carbon footprints are bigger than ordinary cars. And all these policies are aimed at making money by super corporations. What should we do? We've got to destroy all their sacred cows. And next one. We've got to enjoy life. You've got to enjoy life. Don't feel guilty about driving cars. What we're seeing now is, and the other speakers are going to talk about it more, but the so-called left-right divisions in politics are getting very confused. What we really have is a struggle between accountability and globalisation, which is totally not accountable. And the way to fight back is things like our Action for Life, which is to have real debate and accountability and to make Extinction Rebellion extinct. And to get there, we go to the next graph, next picture. What we're going to have is to fight for accountability in politics and science everywhere, and this will have to turn into mass action. Thank you. In the prize. All right, I will end there.